He continues, he says, beside the disparity in energy levels between the young and the old, there is a variation in their mental temperaments as well. Children possess the power of grasping new concepts and ideas faster than their elders. That explains why youngsters take to new trends and fashions earlier than grown-ups, while the parents take much longer time to absorb anything new. This disparity in time for absorption of innovative ways of living causes what is commonly referred to as the generation gap. Hence, it becomes the parent's obligation to understand, to realize the existence of the natural disparity of levels both in the physical and mental makeup of the young and the old. Unfortunately, the well-wishing and well-meaning parents fail to recognize the existence of these glaring differences in natures. Instead, they try to treat this nagging problem with an iron hand. All right, so he's talking about the generation gap. There's a natural tendency, well, it's a natural feature of youngsters is that their capacity to absorb fresh knowledge is very, very high. When we're young, that capacity is very high, and as we age, it tends to diminish. Like any of the sort of, you can compare it to the physiological functions. As we age, hearing and sight and digestion and other things just naturally start to wind down. They lose their energy, In the same way, this capacity for the fresh absorption of knowledge, of new ideas, new trends, new fashions, it's very, very high in youngsters, and so they can take to new things very easily. I remember watching, I think it was an 18-month-old or a 2-year-old playing with an iPad, and immediately just knew how to use things, go back, go to new apps, play with the apps. It seems so intuitive. And when you see an adult who's the first time they see a touchscreen, can you remember when you first saw a touchscreen? It doesn't seem natural. It's such a revelation. But for the youngsters, yes, it's a revelation, but it's also very natural. Bang, okay, what's this now? Good, this is it. There's no barrier to overcome. There's also there's another sort of related phenomenon to this. He talks about, anytime we learn something new, it means having to sort of discard or tinker with what we used to know. The more we know and the more we claim to know and the more dependent we are on our knowledge, then that becomes more difficult. Whereas children don't have that same degree of being encumbered with a past history. So they can take new things much more easily. So you get this generation gap. Differences in values, differences in cultures, difference in behaviours. Ask the average 15-year-old what they think of gay marriage. Ask the average 85-year-old what they think. Right? It's not that one generation is more liberal than another. Don't confuse that. It's just what is normal. And if the 85-year-old had been born at the same time as the current 15-year-old was, he too would have the same attitude. Because that is what has been absorbed from the environment. Now, the 85-year-old has had as much time with that same stimulus, but the absorption of that idea takes a lot longer. Even if he has that tendency to think that it's, there's no reason for anyone not to get married if they want to, if he himself has a liberal attitude. But the absorption of the new idea takes a lot more time. And so this contributes to the communication gap, because there's a cultural gap. There's a psychological gap between what the parents think of as relevant and what the child thinks of as relevant, where they are situated in the culture. And again, the job is of the parents to make the effort. You can't expect the youngsters to make the effort to understand what it's like to be an adult. Not possible. So the problem is that we fail to recognize the contribution of these factors towards that gap between the young and the old. And when we fail to recognize that there are these contributing factors which make us, in a sense, completely different people. Almost, you could say, different cultures. We live in the same house, but we've got completely different cultures. When we fail to recognize that that is the case, then what we tend to do is presume, well, my perspective is the perspective. And so we act towards the youngster as if our perspective is theirs. And somehow why are you functioning in such a crazy manner? They're not. They're functioning in a way which is absolutely consistent with their perspective. They're not being crazy. You're being crazy. And this is exactly what's happening. There's no recognition of that gap. Now, when we know that the gap is there, then, as we were saying earlier, it becomes much easier to deal with the person because we recognize what they think is relevant, what they think is appropriate, what they think is valuable is completely different to what I do, okay? They have an understanding of the way the world works, which is very different from mine because they have absorbed the new trends that have arisen, and I haven't absorbed them yet. I haven't caught up. So it also helps in developing a little humility because you recognize that they know something that I don't know. What is it that they actually are aware of that is accurate and is true that I haven't picked up yet because of my lag time? And you can't ask directly, teach me. You can't do that. You've got to pick it up by osmosis. You've got to pick it up by observation and by careful analysis. When we lack the understanding, then there's this frustration that the person's not functioning according to the rules, and we try to fix it with an iron hand, is what he says here. Treat this nagging problem with an iron hand, or treat this nagging problem with nagging.